You're listening to Investigation Insiders by Integris Intelligence.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Investigation Insiders. This is Farhad. Hope you are all well and safe. Before we get started today, I wanted to just thank everyone again who attended our summer social. We really enjoyed seeing everyone, obviously, and could not be more grateful for the support that we have always had. So, thank you again. In fact, our guest today, who's an incredible guest, uh, came all the way over from the UK and is one of those wonderful supporters. Bruce Petrie, how are you, Bruce? Thanks for joining us today for this episode.
Thanks, Farad, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today.
Absolutely. So, I guess, Bruce, usually I talk about the relationship to start. And, you and I met several years ago when you left public service, joined Tetrix, and which is one of our key partners in the UK. And our mutual friend and your colleague Steve Holland made the introduction when you came over to the US in New York City. And we've been fast friends and colleagues since. So is that a fair assessment of our relationship?
Yes, without a doubt.
Yeah. So to start, perhaps you could provide a high level overview of your background.
Yeah, I joined working life really after I left school at 16, where I joined the army. Um, Originally standing outside Buckingham Palace with a red jacket on and a furry hat, but as an infantry soldier, served worldwide. And due to family circumstances, I got out of the army and joined government service. Um, been within the government for a number of years, mainly working within the surveillance environment, intelligence community, before moving over to the UK medicines regulator. That's the equivalent of your FDA in their law enforcement side, where I ran their proactive covert unit, consisting of informant handling, surveillance, and undercover work.
Sure. And so, can you talk a little bit about where you grew up and as a kid, what did you want to do when you got older?
Yeah. So, I was born in Dundee in Scotland, as you can tell. Um, uh, from as young as I can remember, um, I wanted to join the army. Always wanted to do it. And so, as soon as I left school, I joined as a boy soldier at the age of 16. And I think it's fair to say, even now, I miss it every day. It's such a fantastic life for anybody considering the forces. It's really really worthwhile and builds you for the future. To be honest.
Sure. So you went from wanting to be a soldier, and you already alluded to like family reasons as far as why you ended up working for the government. But can you talk a little bit about how you actually ended up working for the government?
Yeah, the transition actually from the military to the government was quite simple, simply because there is programs in place that retrain you and develop you, give you the skill sets to get in the government. So I initially joined the government on a surveillance team. Um, Worked on there for a number of years, particularly on the motorcycle side, and then moved into the intelligence community where I was at the Serious Fraud Office in the UK, um, and then moved over to the Medicines Health Regulator um, on their law enforcement side, just through an opportunity really of meeting an individual, and an opportunity came up, and I was able to transfer over to them, and never looked back. It was a good organisation to work for. Well, I think working for the government as a whole generally is actually a good career development move, and they do provide the opportunity for upskilling you for the future.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. So then talk about the transition from the public sector into the private sector and how you got involved with Tetrix and the business.
Yeah, I mean, I got involved with Tetrix originally through offering assistance and advice to Steve, the person you mentioned earlier, who was the original owner of Tetrix. Obviously, he had a lot of clients in the pharma world, and he would regularly come for a bit of advice around the sort of criminal aspects of investigations he was doing, and we struck up a friendship from there. So when it came to the sort of the time where I was looking at moving out of government service, the opportunity for Steve who's looking to retire sort of all fell into place, and that side of the transition was actually quite easy. The
Sure.
difficult part of the transition was um, the structure within working every day for the government, and the set hours or the Monday to Friday regime doesn't work whatsoever in business, where in effect you are a 24-hour worker 7 days a week, if you're trying to build a business up, which was a bit of a shock. And my children regularly tell me to just sit back and take a day off now and then, which is difficult when you're trying to run your own business.
Sure, sure. It's like the old adage, right? Like you work 80 hours so you don't have to work 40. So
Yeah, yeah.
the so all right. So obviously you're based out of the UK, right? Just
Mm.
from a personal perspective, what are some things that you like the most about being there?
Well, I mean, being in the UK, I travel the world sort of with some of the work that we do, but there is nothing better sometimes than getting back to the UK. I love being around my children. I've got two daughters. I think where I live at the moment, I've got the flexibility of travel. We're in the middle of sort of like the central London sort of travel hub, and I'm not far from the two major airports of Heathrow and Gatwick. I also like to say that I like the weather in the UK. I'm not a big fan of massive heat. Obviously, being Scottish, um, so that sort of appeals to me. And one minute you could be extremely in an area of extreme sort of busyness with
Yeah,
population and vehicles, and then 5 minutes down the road you could be in the countryside and not see another car or person for a few miles. So I enjoy all that sort of stuff.
sure, sure. Well, you and I had a chance to spend some time in New York City recently. So I'd like to spend the next minute or so talking about how much better New York City is than your neck of the woods. But I'm gonna let you I'm gonna let you take the lead on that. So tell us how we stacked up against your hometown.
Yeah, I mean, and I found New York was fantastic. As I say, we conduct a lot of TSCM operations worldwide. So I
Yeah,
do get the opportunity to sort of travel extensively.
yeah,
Each country has its unique set of customs and rules. An example of that is you go to some countries and their sort of driving standards and the state of the vehicles could raise a few eyeballs, for example. But when it comes to New York, I mean, I found New York very similar to London. It was
yeah,
busy, noisy, the usual scams on tourists that I saw. I sat at uh, Times Square, and it was easy to spot, but I could sit in Leicester Square in
right.
London and see exactly the same. However, what uh, does impress me with America as a whole and New York, and as you know from Times Square, they've got the military recruitment hut there, and I spoke to a master sergeant when I was there.
Yeah,
The public, um, when they see that you're an ex-veteran, the very first words that come out of an American is "Thank you for your service." You
Right.
never get that in the UK. I think the support and recognition of veterans in the US, the UK could certainly learn from. But when I was there, I think the most poignant part of the visit was to the 9/11 memorial.
Yeah.
At your social function that you mentioned at the beginning, I actually had a long conversation with Bridget, who obviously works there, and her father was in one of the towers. So
Right.
when going there and realizing some of the things that she was saying, it was a very poignant sort of visit, considering that that event changed the world,
Yeah.
of how the whole world acts it nowadays. And people that I've spoke to since they've come back and asked me what New York is like, the first thing I've always said: walk down the side of the Hudson and get to the 9/11 memorial. It's a must for all visitors to New York. The people are friendly. Um, it was such a nice sort of city to visit, away from the bustle and hustle of Times Square.
Yeah, no, that's all just a really, I mean, that almost could be a New York City commercial, what you just talked about. But
Mm.
um, it really was great to see you, and I'm really glad you came over for it. So thank you again for that. And so I guess let's dive into, so this year we've had a couple of people on that, and have a couple of people scheduled going forward, where we do a lot of work internationally with partners like yourself that help us with clients that we have here in the US that have interests abroad. And,
Mm.
they ask us to investigate, consult, whatever the case is. And obviously, we rely on folks like yourself. So, the UK and the US, just due to the connectivity, obviously, there's a lot of overlap in businesses and business interests and people and all that sort of stuff. So, the inspiration really is to talk about, you know, managing risk in the UK. That's such a, it's a broad, broad term, right? And so obviously we're not going to get a chance to speak to every single aspect of it. But, I wanted to give our audience some things to think about and, kind of mull over. And, obviously if there's any follow-up required, we can always do that
Yeah.
offline. But can you talk about the UK as a whole? Can you, just from a geography, the different parts of it, and talk about it as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say, in the UK, and particularly those doing business here, we're still sort of dealing with the fallout of Brexit. And that was a
Sure.
number of years ago. Only yesterday they introduced new visa rules for UK citizens travelling to the EU. So
Yeah.
going forward, we will have to have a visa similar to a visa going into the US. Um, and that's something new. When we were in the EU, we could travel across Europe, without much additional cost to even mobile telephone networks. That's all changed. So as a business, if you're solely within the UK, then the only doing business in the UK, then the costs are sort of quite limited. But if you are a UK business trying to expand into the EU or have European partners, there is an additional cost and sort of regulations that need to be adopted, for us to be able to do business, which I don't think a lot of people considered, when we were looking at the options of either being in the EU or not. At the moment, you've probably saw in the national news, there was um, a we call it a mass killing of a number of children at a
Yeah.
nursery recently due to social media, which they've identified actually is not actually originating in the UK. It caused a number of riots just through stoking fear around immigration. Um, and although it's died down now, that we're still seeing the aftereffects of that through um, restriction in prison sentences, etc. So it doesn't, from the outside, it doesn't look that great at the moment, but from the inside, if you take them two issues aside, it's not a bad place to do business, really.
Sure. So talk about the overall culture and how it differs perhaps from here in the U.S. and how you think that plays a role in what can and cannot be done.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain aspect, yes, in the UK. I mean, a number of things sort of come to mind. There's a communication style that's slightly different in the UK. We seem to be a little bit more reserved and have an indirect communication style that is different to sort of like the US. Um, I think risk taking in the UK with UK companies and innovation tends to be a bit more cautious than in the US. There's
Yes.
often focus on long term stability over like short term gains, which could give the impression that some UK companies are a bit more risk adverse. However, what we've saw recently with a number of clients, U-based clients, on the HR side, which traditionally have always been um, reserved, are actually going the opposite way, and they're becoming more adapt to sort of looking at options that could be that can be used to assist in their HR investigations, from putting cameras in places in the workplace through to placing issued employees, etc., under surveillance, which a few years ago they would have been a bit hesitant to do. The other thing being work-life balance. There's a strong emphasis in the UK, particularly with company policies around time off and where you work and how you work, etc. And this is
Sure.
sort of shown on leave entitlements and public holidays that we have in the UK. Government service typically will give you about, I think it's about 36 days annual leave, and then you've got
Right.
your 8 bank holidays on top of that. And I
Sure.
think there's also the cultural differences that plays a part in shaping business practices and the kinds of strategies that sort of may be successful compared to each country.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like the things that you're saying. We've done obviously work with folks that have either headquarters here and offices in UK and Europe, or vice versa, right? And I always find it strange when like whatever the headquarters is, wherever that may be, where they try to manage it from their perspective and the way that so the US, let's just say the folks here trying to manage a business in the UK with kind of our thought process, our processes and all, they always have a difficult time with that sort of culture clash, and vice versa. So do you agree with that, or
Yeah, I would agree, and I'm going to give you a sort of slight example. I had a colleague who worked for the regulator, been there a
Mhm.
number of years, so she had quite a high leave entitlement, and was and left government service to work for an American medical device manufacturer. And I remember talking to her, and she says, "I only get 2 weeks leave a year, and I can't have them the 2 weeks together. I have to have a week here and a week there,
Sure.
because the basically her employer said, if you have to have 2 weeks off together, then your job's not important enough. You would never get an employer in the UK to do that. And there is you could see that with a major sort of home delivery company,
Yeah.
which was set up in the US, is now obviously worldwide. The conflicts they have in the UK in relation to staff welfare, staff
Mm.
engagement, you could clearly see they're trying to apply American HR guidance to UK policy, which there's a clash there straight away. So yeah, you can see it
You, you, you
quite a lot.
know, I remember just on the same note, dealing with a like a UK financial firm that had an interest here in New York, and there was always like these compliance measures, right? That were unrelated to the function that we were dealing with, but it was like, no, you have to do it this way. We have to, the compliance aspects of this have to be, and there's no issue or resistance to compliance in general. It was just like a square peg into a round hole. Like this just
Yeah.
doesn't work. It almost seemed like there was so much compliance, there was no work being done. You know what I mean? So just similar to your story. So like from our perspective, that's something that I noticed in the past. So
Yeah, and,
uh,
and employment rights, the employees' rights after a certain length of employment, even if it's a contract, um, has an impact as well. So another example, if you employ a UK individual on a contract for 12 months,
yeah,
and that contract extends beyond that, let's just say to 2 years, then
right.
when the contract comes to an end, they're entitled to a number of benefits when they actually leave, even though they're only a temporary employee. So there's
Yeah.
then those sort of uh, rules that sometimes go under the radar that a lot of employees, a lot of employers, and companies trying to work in the UK forget. So
Yeah.
it is a regulation minefield in certain respects.
Yeah. No, for sure. And we've heard that. So let's talk about like what's important to know about risk. And again, I'm using the term broadly in the region, meaning the UK, for US entities doing business there. And what are some of your biggest concerns?
Well, yeah, I mean, as we just mentioned, you've got your regulatory and compliance, particularly
Yeah.
after Brexit. There's still writing regulations. They're still trying to apply compliance to companies, either European companies or overseas companies working in the UK, or moving business between EU and the UK. Obviously, you've got your economic risk, you've got your currency fluctuation. Um, Obviously, we work in the British pound. It could be volatile against the US dollar depending on what's happened. I mean, we have a saying in the UK: the US coughs and the rest of us get a flu. So how business and economics are going in the US really sort of impact on the value of the British pound. So companies would face a risk related to the exchange rate fluctuation, which could impact on profits, etc. You've also got market saturation and competition. If you were wanting to come across and set up a executive protection sort of company in the UK, the market is saturated with executive protection professionals. So that needs to be that has a risk if it's going to cost money to come across and do it. Obviously, you've got your political risks. Brexit, for instance, the changes post Brexit. We've got regulatory sort of issues going post Brexit, political instability. Um, we've had one of our political parties have been in power for, I think it's about 13 or 16 years, and we just got a new political party. So there's a bit of uncertainty of how they're going to manage the economy going forward. So that needs to be considered. Um, Operational challenges. Obviously, you've got your cultural differences, the understanding and integrating in sort of the UK business culture, which may, as we've already discussed, may differ significantly in the US, particularly around certain sort of religious periods. So it has to be that has to be taken into consideration. You've obviously got your supply chain disruptions. Again, post Brexit, um, getting product out of the UK into Europe, for instance, is proving quite difficult, particularly over land. Um, and there's a lot more paperwork and certification that is required just to move product from the UK to the EU. And then obviously the other one being intellectual property protections. That needs to be considered. I did a bit of work with an American company, and their product had one patent, but the actual counterfeiters were not interested in that one area that they had patented. They were interested in the colour of the pill, the shape of the pill, etc., all which hadn't been patented. So you need to be aware of all of that going forward, because the UK is an area that is favourable for counterfeiters.
Sure, sure. And so that's all. I mean, really helpful from a security perspective. I guess it, I'm thinking that the security risks around properties, people, things like that are similar to that of our sort of risk culture here in the U.S. as well, right?
Yes, I mean, um, when we assess risk, we assess it as in the information, the individual, and the property,
Yeah,
and then look at the impact compared to the probability side of things.
yeah,
Obviously, in the UK, if we look at the executive protection side again,
yeah,
we're unarmed. Our police are not armed, and
yeah.
we see very, very few incidents of gun crime.
Hmm.
Um, but you move outside of the UK. So when we work with some of our clients abroad, we are still not armed, but the risk factor increases because guns are readily available in them countries. So
Sure, sure.
um, if anything, I think the client side
Hmm.
has relaxed a little bit on on their um, uh, engagement with risk management
Mm,
since the COVID epidemic, how people work, where people work remotely, etc. And then
sure.
they'll come up with an idea to bring everybody together, and then without making any sort of assessment around risk, around the people, the information, or where they meet it.
That's a really important point, and so like with that being said, let's talk a little bit about how I guess, and I'm focused on the U.S. because obviously
Mm.
we're here, but this could obviously apply to other countries as well. How should they be thinking about mitigating all the risks that you're sort of like outlining for us?
Well, obviously, assessing the risk and plan ahead.
Yeah,
It's very difficult to support um, an event. We'll use an event as an example. It's very
yeah,
difficult to assist or help in an event when you're getting a very limited time to put in place a plan around the risk management. So um, assessing the risk or identifying internally what you believe the risks to be and
sure.
plan ahead. Early engagement is crucial. We did a conference for a global partner last year, and we got 7 months to prepare for it.
Right.
We then were asked by the same global partner, due to staff changes as a result of lockdown, to assist on a very similar event, and we got 3 days' notice to put the same plan in place at a different location with
Right.
different entities there, with different high net worth individuals. So it's that identifying your risks, and you can have that in a standard template.
Yeah.
Risk management, bang, and then plan ahead, and then obviously engage with that local partner to assist. Um, we could do the due diligence. We can do sort of all the rules around it, even down to having a medic on site, because hospitals are not um, quick to deal with or not close enough in the UK where the event may be getting held.
Sure. No, I mean that's really helpful. The theme, right? Like again, it's just interesting. Like as you talk about assessing, preparing, planning in advance, right? It always shocks me how as simple as the concept is, right? people don't do it. And like, to give you one simple example, we just recently had someone reach out to us related to an office that they have in Paris, and they're saying, I mean, this is literally like 2 days before the Olympics are set to start, right? Saying, asking a bunch of questions related to that, and um, we said, you waited a little bit long here, and then they were saying they're having trouble getting people on the ground. I said, well, this is not the event you want to plan 2 days before, right?
Mm.
And the truth is, there's nothing that way. If it's important enough to discuss, it's important enough to plan for, in my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And we were in exactly the same situation. We had 3 days' notice to conduct some activity in Paris before the opening event.
Yeah,
Um, and sometimes, particularly around sort of the technical surveillance side,
yeah,
it's achievable. But when you're trying to organise um, uh, executive protection, movement of individuals, routes, etc., because if you use the Olympics as an example, 2 weeks before the event even took place, all the roads were locked down.
right,
So you're pushing everybody onto a set route. Um, so you trying to plan it 2 days ahead when you may spend most of that 2 days driving from Charles de Gaulle Airport into central Paris, and you've lost 3 or 4 hours straight away,
right.
and your clients arriving, etc.
Yeah,
It becomes difficult and frustrating, but I think clients, when it comes to risk, and it's not just business risk, it's operational risk.
right.
We clients sometimes see it as an afterthought. It's a bit like business continuity. When
Sure.
that started a number of years ago, it was almost seen as an afterthought,
Right.
because they'd never had a problem before. So why do we need business continuity
Yeah.
until it
Yeah.
happens?
No, for sure. So, can you share? You already shared one, but do you have a case study or something that, whether it's from your time with the government or afterwards, that helps to demonstrate an ill-prepared organization, and the consequences of it?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to within government, I think if you look at Brexit, for instance, the
Yeah.
UK government was extremely well planned for it. The medicines regulator put a whole team on it, and we were well sort of versed, well briefed, and all the plans were put in place. So that actually went quite well. Uh, I think in business, when companies were coming out of the remote working side, and where they haven't been able to get together, for us, we'll use the conference as an example again, haven't been able to get together, um, and then they decided that it's to do that. Let's have a conference. Then they're so focused on getting everybody together that they forget that the preparation and planning that is required to actually get people there. So you'll end up with um, high net worth individuals. You'll end up with conversations around sensitive information, and people attending and for theft, etc. Because that's the other thing we have in the UK. A lot of people enter hotels for the purpose of theft, and none of that gets sort of taken in consideration, because the main driver and the blind everybody gets blind to the fact that this is the first opportunity
Right.
to get together as an organization. Let's
Yeah.
just get together. And we've been brought in. We regularly do the event security. So we'll manage the iNetwork individuals. We'll manage access to the areas. We'll manage access to the social side, and we manage the whole event, even placing on a paramedic to be on standby.
Sure.
the routes, the hospitals, and that. But that takes a bit of planning. And as I say, the last one we did, we had about a week's notice to put a plan in place,
Hmm.
and you could clearly see the difference between um, pre lockdown and post lockdown. How the focus of why are we doing this? What are we trying to achieve? Slightly changed because they were interested in getting everybody together before thinking of, right, okay, we need to get everybody together. What is our plan, and how do we manage all that risk? Um, so it's I think organisations need to just step back and focus a little bit, and make sure that the risk management is not an afterthought, because then obviously they need to manage that information risk, they need to manage that people risk, and then ultimately they need to manage that property risk, whether it be personal property,
Yeah.
or property that's on site, because a lot of these clients will turn up with equipment worth hundreds of thousands of pounds, and they'll be
Hmm.
placed in the corner. We
Yeah.
know no one looking at it. So the other issue being with all that as well is, due to remote working, when people saw that remote working might be coming to an end, they'll move positions either within the company or outside the company where they can still receive that benefit. And that knowledge base of what do we need to manage the risk for this event
Yeah.
gets lost sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean that's really really helpful. In fact, my sort of closing question to you was going to be, what recommendations do you have for U.S. businesses or people considering doing business in the region? I think you addressed a lot of that in what you just said. Is there any sort of like remaining points that you'd want to get out there, or just sort of summarize? If you had like if you wanted people to walk away with just one or two sort of key takeaways from this discussion, what would they be?
Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking of doing sort of business in our region, yeah, like a number of companies do with yourself, and you engage with us, it's engaging with that local partner to understand the local sort of circumstances.
Yeah.
Do your research. Uh, you got to do due diligence all the way. Continuously keep that due diligence going until you're set up and running, etc. Obviously, there is um, the opportunities for fraud in the UK. So anti-fraud processes, anti-fraud sort of considerations need to be at the forefront of your mind if you're looking at coming over for business. But it is that um, engaging in that local partner to do that due diligence on your behalf, to ensure that when things do sort of land and you're up and running, that you know that everything is legal and in compliance, and it's genuine.
Yeah, no, I think that's just solid advice and just a great way to conclude this episode. So, just for everyone listening, prior to the recording, Bruce and I and Joe, who's always in the background here and really is driving this whole podcast, we were talking, and Bruce was he doesn't normally do this, so I twisted his arm and got him on the show, and he was nervous about doing it, and I could tell you 100%. I was actually texting Joe as we were speaking. You killed it, man. You did a great job, and I'm sure our audience is gonna love listening to you.
Well, thank you. I mean, as I've always said, I don't only see you as a business partner in that international sort of environment. I also see you as a bit of a mentor, because you've offered me some fantastic advice over the few years, which I do sort of use on a daily basis.
I appreciate that, and so thank you for that, and thank you for joining. For everyone listening, thank you for the continued support. Keep sending your comments into us. Keep following us and sharing us. And until next time, thanks again, Bruce.
Thank you.
Don't forget to follow us. We are on LinkedIn and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube.